Okay. And also during that period of time when he came out of the temple, shortly thereafter, I think it was Memorial Day weekend of May 1965, he was arrested for allegedly a public disturbance. They went out to Bellevue, and ultimately they shipped him off to Mattawan. Mm-hmm. And he stayed there for a couple of years until the end of March or early April 1967. And then he came back out. And when he came back out, one of the things that he noticed is that he may have started from a few 5%ers, but over the course of time while he was incarcerated, the other 5%ers taught more young brothers and sisters. So when he came home, there was, hundreds of 5%ers, they say. And they talk about how he established the Universal Parliament in April of 1967. It was the first of its kind when the brothers went to Mount Mars Park in Harlem, now known as Marcus Garvey Park. And the father, Allah, Clarence 13X, had a Universal Parliament in which he had all these 5%ers there. And as a young 5%er, when I was coming up, I always heard about this first parliament. And I always heard about there was a Muslim or a group of Muslims who approached the father and they had a debate between themselves. And of course, in my research, I found out that you're the very said individual that was there at the first Universal Parliament that was representative of the FOI or the Nation of Islam, or you probably went on your own accord. So I want to know, one, how did you end up at the Universal Parliament, under what set of circumstances?
And it's the question is the question that I answer or talk about whenever I'm talking on the 5%ers or during the history of Mosque number 7. I was managing the restaurant for Captain Yusuf Shah. And one Sunday, Minister Farrakhan, at that time, we were meeting in the Bronx. And he knew that I had always been an assistant minister under Malcolm when he first came to New York, and I was working with him at first. Circumstances, I ended up helping with the restaurant and using some of my management skills to manage the restaurant. And so the minister asked me, would you open up for me today in the Bronx? I want to get you back on the roster. And I said, of course, Brother Minister. So I put on my FOI uniform. I came to the restaurant to make sure everything was straight. And Yusuf Shah comes in and asks me, where was I going? Because I wasn't dressed like I was working in the restaurant. I said, I'm going up to the Bronx to open up for Minister Farrakhan. He said, well, Brother Larry, you got to make a decision. You cannot manage the restaurant and work on the roster. You got to choose between one and another. And my heart and passion was for teaching. And I had to think about it. As a matter of fact, I didn't even go up to the Bronx, I don't think, that day to open up. I don't think I went. But what I did is I walked up to the park while I was thinking and praying over it. And I walked up to the park and I walked up to the hill. At the top of the hill, I saw it may have been 500 or 600, but I said it looked like 1,000 people. Young people. And when I walked up in the FOI uniform, the young people opened up a path, and there was Clarence. And I gave him the greetings. He had a baby in his arm and a cigarette in one hand. And the first thing I said to him is, so Clarence, how are you teaching these young brothers that you are Allah? And you're standing there with a cigarette in your hand. And he said to me that Allah is not bound, fixed by anything. Allah must master all things. And the whole crowd said, oh, praise is due to Allah. Then he went on to say to me that I am the one. I've been shot with an elephant gun through the heart, and I lived, And they said, oh, praise is due to Allah. Then I told him, I said, well, Clarence, time is a test to all men and all ideas. And time will tell who you are. And they opened up. We may have had a few other words. Right now I can't recall. But they opened up a path. I turned and I left. And I remember clearly I had no fear that the brothers would jump on me. I just didn't think they were going to do it. But what I was pained by is two things. One, that these were all of his disciples. He just came home. They were happy to see him and the myth around him. And that he stood there with a cigarette. That bothered me. The second thing that bothered me, he was naming a baby. And I think they even said the name of the baby. He had a child that he was naming because one of the young men or women, the women had the baby for one of the young men. And I was thinking about that thing. And then when he mentioned about he was shot one time, and that you know he was the one. In other words, I am God. That's a kind of thing that would hurt and damage these young people. But also, I said, now I don't know what happened to him after, but shortly after that, maybe it was 2 years after that, right, that he was killed. And I have said many times that one of the young boys in the crowd who wanted to prove and show that he was Allah may have been the one that put those 7 bullets in him, okay? And only those that did it know the truth of it. Right. But I know that the Nation of Islam was accused of having something to do with the same thing with Charles 37X. And when he was shot, we were always the ones accused. And when you have this kind of thing going on, where someone leaves an organization, forms something away from that organization that is really against the principles of that organization, and he was one, you always have this. Right. I mean, so at that parliament, I think that, and shortly after that, he's killed. And I'm the one that said that one of the young brothers in the crowd may have wanted to show and prove that he was really Allah, and he wanted to test it out. And I don't know what the police said, who did it, and so forth, but that's what happened on that particular day. And right after that, I'm working in the streets of Harlem, and I would see him. I would see him with a cigarette. I would see him shooting crap around 132nd Street and 8th Avenue, and that's where his little home area was. He would be out there shooting craps, and I would see him at a store that was on the corner of 8th and St. Nicholas, I think it was, where we used to go to get coffee. So I used to see him. He would wave to me, or I'd say salam alaikum, and we go on, but we never got into a debate in the streets that we went back and forth over what he was doing, and he knew that I disapproved because I felt that I said, Clarence, what you're doing with these young boys is not correct. And when I would go to the prisons, and I would see those same young boys that I knew as children that would come up to me and remind me, I lived on 118th Street. I was the brother on 100 that used to come to you and talk to you about the lesson. And most of them were in there because they had got busted with heroin or selling heroin or using it, whatever it was the case that they were in jail. So that disturbed me because Clarence, if he was in the street and he was going to do the good that he could by using the lessons, then he should have also used the principles that he learned inside of the Nation of Islam of disciplining yourself from those kind of things.